In this video, we are going to watch a bunch of wokies try and gang up on Jordan Peterson in a panel debate. And the reason why I want to cover this is because this is a perfect example of how political correctness is a cancer. And at the end of this video, I'm going to explain exactly why. Let's get into the clips.
You know, I know a lot of people who have staggeringly successful careers, and they're often loath to go into a political field despite the tremendous expertise they've developed, because they have to put everything that they've already accomplished on hold or in hawk, in a sense, to enter the public sphere. And I think one of the I understand the conflict of interest problem, but one of the problems with that is that the most highly competent people in many fields are dissuaded from a political career because it requires the unproductive sacrifice of everything they've built. And so what that does, in some sense, is deprive us of some of the best people who could be considering politics as a mode of public service. And so that's a complicated problem to try to solve.
Woman there in the green top. Hang on, wait a minute. Let's just get the mic to you. There you go.
Why do we assume that such people are the best people? They're obviously not.
Well, because
the best
they've demonstrated
people
extreme competence in at least one area of
That's
inquiry.
banking. That's that person. This is why we're in the situation where we are with people like politicians that we have at the moment that are corrupt. There's no transparency, there's no accountability that you get in industry, and we don't even have it in our politics at the moment.
Yeah, but that's not
because
why
of
you
this
have corruption.
attitude
No.
that what is perceived as a good leader.
No,
And
that's not why you have that
issue
problem.
is.
Most people who are successful in their given field aren't corrupt. It's very difficult to become successful and be corrupt.
So
I know
we're making
people
that
like to think that, but it's just not true.
Corruption is good, it's acceptable.
Look, 3% of the population is psychopathic, and it never really goes above that. And the reason that it never goes above that is because being psychopathic is not a very good strategy. And so the idea that people in power are corrupt, by definition, especially if they've built up their stature and influence as a consequence of competence, is simply wrong. And so you do want people who've demonstrated high levels of competence in at least one other field to serve as potential political candidates. What else would you use as a criteria for their ability?
So why is
What
that
else do you have?
3% elevated as our leaders? Why is that 3% elevated as our leaders?
They're not. They aren't. That's wrong. And to think that way is counterproductively cynical. It's absolutely the case that institutions have a proclivity towards corruption under some circumstances. That's true of all institutions. But to blindly assume that that's more characteristic, let's say, of your political leaders than it is of you, for example, as a person, or that it's more specifically characteristic of political leaders than people who are operating at the highest level of their capacity in other areas. It's an empty sort of cynicism. It doesn't serve people well, and it's not true of reasonable governments or countries. It's simply not true.
Peterson's just making a very balanced point here. He's saying if there is a politician who has succeeded in something beforehand and gotten to a high level, whether that be in banking or being a lawyer, then that is a good thing. But he's also saying that many of the most competent people in our society, such as entrepreneurs and CEOs, will not go anywhere near politics, because why would they risk everything? I mean, look what happened to Trump when he went into politics. And this is why you get guys like Joe Biden who rise to the top, who is just a career swamp creature, who has been a bureaucrat for about 50 years.
Come on, man.
People like this lady just think rich man bad. Like, who else would you want to do that job? Somebody who's never achieved anything? How about university students? Why don't you step up to the plate and do something? And stick around, guys, because Jordan Peterson is about to go full-on Legolas from Lord of the Rings with his bow of knowledge and accumulated wisdom and his arrow of linguistic prowess and articulation. But before then, if you get value from this content, guys, chuck me a thumbs up, leave me a comment if you feel inclined to do so, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on all notification bells.
Let's take another question. From Julian Lee.
With the revelations from cricket's Azim Rafiq and footballers still taking the knee, what does this say about racism as a continuing undercurrent in present-day Britain?
Nazir.
The brown person will answer first. Yeah. No disrespect.
Nazir, so do you think that was wrong of me to come to you first?
I think so. I think.
Well, let's not do it then. Jordan. I don't mean that. I'm not being sarcastic at all. I mean, if that's how you feel, I respect that. Let's go to Jordan. Well, that's a fair point. I'll come to Jordan.
I think the same point I made earlier applies, is that things need to be particularized rather than generalized, as a general rule, let's say. And so this cricket player was facing racism by his own count. The question is, who, when, what, exactly? Because otherwise it degenerates into something like a discussion of structural racism. And when it becomes abstracted up to that level, first of all, that pits group against group, which I think is entirely counterproductive. And it actually doesn't address the issue. You know, racism is a global and vague term.
Sorry, but
why
would you possibly do that? What did that mean?
Because I said it was a global and vague term.
The inverted commas as if it's not a real thing.
No, that isn't what it meant.
Well, what did it mean then? Explain.
It meant that it's indicative of low-resolution thinking. And what I mean by that is we use all these terms frequently in discussions like this that are
he was
containers of undifferentiated content.
He was repeatedly called abusive terms directly linked to his ethnicity.
By who?
By not just one, but repeated members of the Yorkshire Cricket Club. He's had people contact him. If it walks like a duck, Jordan, talks like a duck, it's a duck. It's racism.
I am not denying his experience.
Right.
What I asked was exactly who and when, and you just answered that question. So I would say those specific people should be held specifically to account for their actions before any movement up the abstraction hierarchy to a discussion of something like structural racism, which I don't think is helpful.
Well, he has talked about institutional racism in cricket. He says that's what he's experienced as a term, institutional racism.
Right, I know. And like I said, I believe that abstracting up the problem to that level of analysis does no good because it pits groups against groups. I think it exacerbates the problem. The concept of structural racism. It's too imprecise. It doesn't address the issue. Now, that does not mean racism does not exist. That is not what I'm saying in the least.
Maybe let's do less of the hand movements and let's look at the evidence.
So yes,
I'll try
to control it in the future.
He is completely right to put racism in inverted commas because the left has totally obscured what it means to be racist these days because they see racism in everything and everywhere. And if you watch the full program, guys, this guy Stephen Flynn, the Scottish politician, everything that comes out of his mouth the whole time is just constant, incessant virtue signalling. And it just goes to show where Scotland is at. But back to the point, the obfuscation of racism has led to the ridiculous spectacle of English Premier League players kneeling for BLM before games, but now they call it no room for racism. And if you really think about it, that is one of the most non-racist environments that you could ever lay eyes upon. All different players from all different parts of the world getting paid millions and millions of dollars, whether you're from England or whether you're from the Democratic Republic of Congo, to come together and kick a ball around for the entertainment of millions of people who just want to watch this sport for the spectacle and for the entertainment. It's something that completely transcends race. We don't need to have these struggle sessions on national TV every time something happens that is perceived to be racist. We don't need to go and shout it from the mountaintops and plaster it all across the media. It only amplifies the problem to epic proportions, which is completely unnecessary. But I think that they know that.
And all of us have a challenge to ask ourselves whether we are normalising forms of racism. And actually, I think that's what Nazir called you to account to about Fiona tonight, was to say we normalise the idea. If we're going to talk about racism, we go to the person of colour first and ask them to give us their hot take. Can I just say, in my
defence, I also tried to get everyone on the panel first as well, to make sure so that everyone has a go at the first question.
But when we talk about that what you did was racist. I don't believe that. I think what you did was a mark of respect. And now that may have been inappropriate and it may have been taken wrong, but that doesn't mean it was racist.
But Jordan,
and so we are going to be precise about it.
Why the concept of structural racism. And we have a problem in British society. We have a problem particularly in sport. And we also have a problem when it comes to our definitions of racism, because people tend to lump people of different minority community backgrounds together. You know,
and how do you talk about structural racism?
I'm going to need to bring other people in as well.
But the thing for me that I think is so powerful is this concept of the bystander, is the idea of the person who may think of themselves not as a racist, who may not have joined in this poor young man being bullied in the way that he was.
I mean, I need to mention
nothing.
Stella simply because he has talked about it himself today, Azim Rafiq, that he has apologised for some
Yeah,
anti-Semitic
and he
tweets that he
himself
put
has
out
said,
several years ago.
What I think is really powerful is how clear and compelling his apology is and how he's recognised it.
If Jordan Peterson was not on this panel, this would just be a competition to see who is the least racist and who can get most offended about the racism and who can stick up for the people of colour the mostest. I mean, this was one of the most agonisingly cringeworthy displays of politically correct virtue signalling that you could ever wish to see. We are past the point now where people are so desperate to conjure up a narrative of racism that they will target and persecute people for these little microaggressions. And what we just saw was a perfect example of why political correctness is a complete and utter cancer, because it stifles any interesting conversation that we have. If you want to talk about important things, you have to be able to offend people. You cannot have a meaningful conversation without offending somebody about anything important. It is literally impossible. And in this time of great tension, where anything could be deemed offensive and you always have to watch what you say in case you offend somebody, and you always have to be thinking about the intersectional hierarchy and where you rank on the hierarchy, people will just simply retreat. They will just totally self-censor and not say what is on their mind out of fear of being persecuted for it. And then do you know what happens? The authoritarian Marxist thought police get to dictate what is right and wrong. And that is not a world that I want to live in, and I don't think it's a world that you want to live in. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you would like access to uncensored, exclusive content and to join the Rattlesnake TV community and support the channel so that I can bring the best content possible to you as often as possible, then please consider hitting the link in the bio, rattlesnaketv.locals.com, and support the channel. And if you want to watch another clip, click right here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, if you get value from these videos, then click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV.